Hey, Guobguang here. Today's video is on none other than the Honorary Dean of the Omniscience, Sapientia Academe, Master of the Decalite Reflection Barrier, Bearer of the Xiaoshao's Intangible Cultural Heritage, the Sparrow-Shaped Fist, the Seer Strategist, General Yao Guang. If that made you giggle your gauge, then my new Elation path is working. But anyways, today we will go over her kit, a bit about how Elation actually works so you can understand her kit, and then we'll move on to her best builds and lycons and who she can actually play with. Let's begin. Yao Guang is a physical Elation 5-star character and our very first Elation character. How humorous. Among base stats, she only really goes crazy in defense, and she has an above average energy cost of 180. When leveling up her abilities, you should focus on her ultimate and her skill, followed by her talent, ignoring basics completely. But what do those abilities actually do for us? Well, normally I'd skip basics, but I just want to note that it is 1, a blast basic attack, which is pretty interesting to have unenhanced, but more importantly, this basic regenerates 30 energy just like a normal skill would. Now for the tricky stuff, starting with her skill. She will deploy a zone for 3 turns, not tricky, and this decreases at the start of her turn, also not tricky. However, whilst the zone is active, all allies get their elation increased by an amount equal to 20% of Yao Guang's elation. Yes, elation is now a stat, thanks for making me have to add a new stat line to my team battle calculator. You can pretty much think of elation as this path's damage percent. Elation damage cannot scale with normal damage percent buffs anymore, replacing it completely with a simple 1 plus elation percent multiplier to damage. It cannot use attack either, but it can still critically hit, Crit is still alive. And of course they can still use damage percent for anything that doesn't do elation damage, but yeah. Anyways, since this stat is rarer than damage percent right now, Yao Guang with the rest of her kit is essentially buffing the team's elation damage a decent amount with this, and this also buffs her own elation so that she is at 1.2 times her original value post-buff. Finally, in this skill, Yao Guang gets 3 punchline after using a basic or a skill. So we gotta explain that part now, I guess. Yes, the Eon is in the action order whenever an Elation gimmick in endgame modes appears or when Elation characters are present. What they will do is trigger an Aha instant, causing all Elation characters present to use an Elation skill 1 time. And if there are no Elation units, they do some damage, but this will be in rare endgame buff scenarios. Elation skills are a brand new ability that this path has, and it will specifically do elation damage. I won't explain the full formula in this video, but it, for example, takes that elation stat from earlier as its damage percent multiplier. What it also does is take the punchline on the right that you built up for another multiplier, and so stacking up punchline make number go up. When the Aha instant ends, all participating characters enter the Guoba certified banger state for 2 turns, and all punchlines you stacked up will be consumed. However, Elation characters store that punchline amount for those 2 turns of this certified banger state, kind of like recording how well you did and using it later for abilities that are enabled by the certified banger state. I hope that makes sense. Stack up punchline, Aha acts now and then. They make Elation characters use Elation skills that scale damage on punchline, then Aha consumes punchline, Elation characters store that punchline for other things, and then they get put in this certified banger state for a baseline of 2 turns, which unlocks more elation damaging abilities. Certified banger states can stack, by the way. So anyways, let's see her elation skill. She inflicts a 16% vulnerability debuff onto enemies for 3 turns, so this will be up permanently, and then deals a whole ton of elation damage, first to all enemies, and then to random enemies with a bounce. Remember, this will scale on the punchline you stacked up on the right. Her talent then tells us what she can do in the certified banger state. After an ally uses an attack, Yao Guang will actually let them deal 1 instance of elation damage even if they don't follow the path. This doesn't mean they do elation skills, it's just additional damage procs, kind of like Robin. If the attack consumes skill points, it also activates twice. Now luckily, since their elation stat will be low, Yao Guang will use her own for the calculation if it is lower than hers. Basically, this only works in the certified banger state, and so it will use any punchlines you see not on the SP bar, but instead on Yao Guang's character icon. This is because she stored the punchline and is now using it for the certified banger passive. Her ult finally gives us another 5 punchline and then gives Aha an extra turn where a fixed amount of 20 punchline is taken and no punchline is consumed. Basically, you get a free Aha action that doesn't ruin his actual normal action. This means every Yao Guang ult is a free turn of elation skills. It's more Punchline for Elation characters to store, and it's an easy certified banger state too. It's a very strong ultimate, at least this early into the meta. This turn also increases all allies' res pen by 20% for 3 turns, more buffs from the general. Now, very quickly, her technique will let you trigger her skill for free at the start of the battle. It also does some overworld stuff, but let's move on, I feel like I'm taking too long. So finally, her passives. When her speed is at 120 or higher, she gets 30% Elation buff, perfect for our damage and her conversion buff. And then she also gets a 1% buff for every speed past 120 up to 200 excess speed. This is just a cap, not a suggestion. Overall, very good for buffing her and the team though. Then she will get a 60% crit damage buff in her A4 passive, more lovely Yao Guang damage. Furthermore, when using Elation skill, she recovers 1 SP for the team, and so with Aha acting decently fast, her ult guaranteeing an Aha instant, and her basics regenerating 30 energy, she is an amazingly SP positive support that still does damage. Finally, we get a 1-turn increase to the certified banger duration when she receives one. This basically means she gets an extra turn of storing those punchlines from Aha instance, and so the Elation damage dealt with her talent from allies can scale pretty decently. Now, let's check out her Eidolons before we move on to builds. In the extra turn Aha gets from her ultimate, the punchline is now increased to 40, the more damage from the Elation skills that happen in the ult, and then better scaling for all certified banger-based Elation damage. Not only that, a 20% def ignore for all Elation damage dealt permanently. This is a very good pickup if wanting to vertically invest into the Elation meta. E2 is then decent with a team-wide 12% speed buff and a 16% Elation buff. I don't like the Elation buff that much personally, it's pretty weak even now, and the speed buff is nice, but it is a whole extra pull, and the Elation team will want Elation units, not just Yao Guang Eidolons. Do note though that Aha's speed scales on the Elation character speeds, so this might end up important in the future. E4 then gives an original 1.5 times multiply to Elation damage in Aha's extra turn in the ultimate. It's a pretty massive buff, but our punchline can get much higher than that 40, and Aha will act much more than Yao Guang can ult. E6 is then the classic make that support into a DPS Eidolon with a large Elation skill multiply increase for Yao Guang. But more importantly, this Eidolon makes Elation damage merry make by 25%, yes, another new term. Though this is simply a new multiplier on top of everything else for Elation damage specifically, think of it as its own break damage multiplier that is still pretty rare, or its own vulnerability debuff. It is a new and rare multiplier, not even in Sparksy's kit. Okay, enough about all of that kit stuff, let's be quick with builds. Luckily, Hoyo is putting the Elation DPS set with the Elation support set. Put the Elation support set on the Elation support. Simple, right? It will increase her speed with the 2-piece and then some crit rate because all Elation characters will probably deal decent damage, and then we get a permanent 10% Elation buff to the team. Technically, I think that Hackspace will also see some use for optimized setups using the speed buff to reach Aha breakpoints, as again, his speed is based on the speed of your Elation characters. But I don't think most players will want to use this, and when we get a third Elation unit, Aha's speed will be much easier to manage. And of course, 2-piece speed combos work as always. It's useful if you want to hit high thresholds for Aha speed breakpoints. As for planars, despite going to Plane Arcadia, we don't have any new ones. I recommend just using Lushaka for energy and buffing the first slot, and this can still be useful for Sparksy even if Elation damage doesn't scale on attack, as she has a passive that utilizes attack for stat conversion. If you need to get ahead of any ally, for example, to ult ASAP before any advance forward, or you want to take 3 turns in Cycle 0 Wave 1, then Vonwak works perfectly well too, and still gives us that 5% energy regen. For her main stats, you will want to opt for Crit Rate Chest, Crit Damage Chest if you're swimming in Crit Rate substats, Speed Boots, Defensive Orb, and Energy Rope. Since Elation damage ignores attack for its calculation, she will deal plenty of damage by just investing into crit, and even with that Defensive Orb, which is really nice. It's kinda like how Break can also go defensive. And so for a stat goal, aim for at least 160 speed for the Relics set breakpoint and to just act a ton, with more speed being fine for scaling the Elation % conversion. I like getting to something like 180. Then aim for 100% crit rate in combat as she self-buffs crit damage a decent amount, and Sparksy would also buff allies crit damage a whole ton too. Other than that, it's just getting defensive stats. Now you might see crazy speed recommendations like 200 speed on Yao Guang with Speed Boost Sparksy to hit 134 speed on Aha, but it costs so much stat investment, will pretty much require pulling her S1, and won't be necessary anymore with a third Elation unit released. Feel free to go for it if you want to min-max Elation early though. Now let's move on to light cones. New path, new trauma. Let's check out her signature. Now remember, since attack does not scale elation damage unless you have specific conversions like Sparksy, the base attack of 5-star light cones aren't impactful anymore, and so the passives will be more important. In her light cone, she will get an 18% speed buff, and if bolting consistently, will give a permanent team-wide 10% crit rate and 30% crit damage, as well as gaining 12% energy regen for herself. Oh, and she gets 15 energy at the start of each wave. Despite its crazy stat line, I reckon a more utility-based elation cone will come out eventually that she can use, so I don't know if you need this right away. It is hella comfy though, and helps a lot with crit ratio farming. Now, Mushy Shroomi's Adventures is a completely free alternative that gives herself 20% elation, so more damage from her and an extra 4% elation to all allies, and then also applies a pretty easily permanent elation vulnerability debuff onto enemies. Perfectly fine to use for the start of elation if you're lacking pulls. I think we'll probably get an elation cone in the Herta shop pretty soonish, and every new elation character could be a new light cone she could use if Remembrance is anything to go by, where a lot of them could kind of use each other's cones to a similar, or sometimes even better degree than their personalized cones in some cases. I'd prefer pulling E1 Yao Guang if vertically investing as a more substantial and consistent upgrade as of now. It'll offer more damage every ult, more punchline stored every ult, and then a permanent 20% F ignore for all elation damage. If you want a cheaper upgrade or want to hit high speed thresholds, S1 is still great though. Anyways, Yao Guang at E0 is a formidable support and seems like a must for the Elation meta, being their cornerstone support. We did say a similar thing about Sunday in Summons though, but the synergy Yao Guang has with the Elation mechanics on top of her actually following the path itself make her much more embedded into this role. She amps Elation units more than anyone else right now. She gives free Elation skills and punchline every ultimate, stacks punchline up a ton herself, and even gives extra elation damage procs in her kit. She's not like Sunday with some bonus synergies, she goes all in. If you're scared of her ending up like Sunday, not actually working for Remembrance despite her more synergistic kit, feel free to wait for a rerun, especially since Sparksy isn't even out for half her banner, and the first banner of 4.1 is a hunt character. Anyway, Sparksy in shield content will work without her, and her damage can still be increased if you have damage ampers that affect the enemy, like Death or Res Shredders or Vulnerability Appliers, but Yao Guang is no doubt invaluable for her and likely for any future Elation DPS. So finally, let's talk a bit about teams before finishing off the video. Sparksy, Yao Guang, Sparkle, and Sustain, Dan Heng PT for example, will be the de facto Sparksy team. Sparkle can be picked up for free in 4.0, Dan was free pre-4.0, and so Yao Guang and Sparksy would be your pulls. Remember that Yao Guang banner is lasting all of 4.0, so you can always wait and see until Sparksy's banner to commit to the Elation Path meta. If you don't pick up Sparkle, then any unit that focuses on non-damage or attack buffs like Cypher or Tribi work okay, but the buffed Sparkle is a formidable synergy. 2 Sparkles, how silly. Now, Yao Guang can also work with anyone really in Elation Shield content. If you can't interact with the mechanics of an Elation Shield, then they are kind of whatever. But with Yao Guang, you can, and so she can abuse high punchline stacking or free AHA action buffs to a great extent, dealing considerable damage for your team. Some enemies are weak to Elation damage or buff the archetype, so again, she can be used to help support that even if she isn't buffing your DPS as much as other supports. I mean, she still gives some res pen and vulnerability, I guess, with crit on the S1 light cone too. She especially works nicely with Archer and any high action users, thanks to her giving elation damage procs every time they attack, twice the amount if they use SP. That means every Archer arrow is a 40% elation damage multiplier, scaling on Yao Guang's elation for some pretty decent extra damage, especially in Elation Shield content. But let me know what you think of Yao Guang and Elation in general. Are you going to pull her and try out the new wacky mechanics? Like and subscribe if this video made you giggle your gauge. Thanks to my amazing YouTube members. Thank you guys for watching and have a Guoba day.